The endings to Mass Effect 3 has been the subject of fervent discussion for more than a decade now, and with good reason. The whole idea of picking between 3 differently colored choices with no definite answers is an idea that's absurd in of itself. And no, refusal doesn't count, don't you even start with me. In any case, as much as the whole entire concept of Mass Effect 3's final choice is crazy, this doesn't even begin to approach the level of absurdity that comes with the quote-unquote perfect ending that the Catalyst would have you believe. Because if you look past the glowing green energy and the Catalyst's soothing monologue, Synthesis is, at its core, the most radical and irreversible decision in the entire trilogy. Just think about everything that the Mass Effect trilogy asks you to consider up until that point. The value of life, the boundaries between synthetic and organic life, the idea that evolution, actual evolution, requires struggle, and choice. Every major decision you make reinforce that. You decide whether to cure the genophage or let an entire species fade away. You choose if the Geth deserves to define their own destiny or be wiped out. You weigh peace against survival and ideology against practicality. And then in the final moment, Synthesis just comes along and says none of that actually matters. You know, we can just combine everything. Merge every living thing into a single unified future. There's no conflict, there's no misunderstanding, there's no possibility of rejection. And if you really sit with the idea of itself, it starts to feel like surrender. Because what does it actually mean to erase the line between organics and synthetics in an instant? Does every species get a voice in that decision? Or are they just along for the ride because you pulled the trigger? You know, for a trilogy that spends dozens of hours teaching you that perspective matters, that the Krogan see survival one way, that the Salarians see progress another, that even the Reapers believe that they're doing something necessary, Synthesis feels like an answer that refuses to ask any more questions. It's presented as this very beautiful inevitability, a final perfect harmony, but harmony without choice isn't harmony, it's compliance. And the strangest part of all this is how casually the game treats the scale of it. You know, the Crucible fires, and then everybody glows green, and suddenly you're told that understanding is universal, that conflict is obsolete. There's no scenes of panic, there's no reaction from people realizing their bodies and minds are no longer entirely their own, just a smooth narration telling you that this is the best possible outcome. But when you look back at everything that the trilogy has built up to that point, it feels impossible to believe that anything could be so simple. This is a universe where entire wars are fought over ideology, where, you know, the Quarians spend centuries trying to reclaim a home they lost to their own creations, where the Geth grapple with questions about consciousness, freedom, and the right to exist. And now in the span of a single pulse of energy, all of that is just resolved. You know, the fear, the thousands of years of trauma, and the slow process of learning to trust each other is just gone, replaced by an artificial sense of connection that quite literally nobody asked for. You spend 3 games trying to convince people to stand together by choice, and Synthesis is the moment you decide that they never needed a choice at all. It's almost ironic, really. For all the times you argue with the Illusive Man about control or the Reapers about inevitability, Synthesis ends up being the most authoritarian solution of them all. Like, you become the architect of a transformation so absolutely vast that no single mind could ever comprehend the scale of it. Because you rewrite the essence of life across the entire galaxy because a glowing child tells you it's the right thing to do. And maybe that's the part that feels the most absurd. That after everything, after fighting for agency, for the right of every species to choose their own path, the final answer is to take that choice away forever. It's the neatest ending Mass Effect offers, but it's also the one that asks you to believe that perfection can be imposed, that consent doesn't matter if the outcome is beautiful enough. You see, the more you think about it, the more the idea just starts to unravel. Because what happens when the glow fades, and people start to realize what's been taken from them? How do cultures built on tradition and ritual and struggle react to the knowledge that their bodies and minds have been rewritten by someone they've never met? Do the Asari still see themselves as the galaxy's guiding hand when every species has been forced into the same evolutionary leap? Do the Krogans feel like their hard-won future was stolen in the name of unity? Does anyone even remember what it felt like to be purely organic or synthetic? The Catalyst calls it the next step in evolution, but maybe, just maybe, it's really just the end of identity. And that's what makes synthesis so very chilling to me, even all these years later. Because it's not really the flashy visuals or the green energy pulse that stuck with me all these years. It's the horror of imagining a future where every conflict, every disagreement, every unique perspective has been flattened into the same engineered consensus. You have a galaxy that looks peaceful on the surface because there are no more wars between Geth and Quarians, there's no more fear of another Reaper invasion, but underneath all that, something vital is missing. Like friction. Friction that creates growth, disagreements that shape the future, the right to say no. The idea that the game presents this as the best ending is almost hilarious. It's a narrative shortcut so extreme it felt like a parody when I first saw it, because here we have a universe built on choices turned into a single irreversible decision nobody gets to weigh in on. It's the narrative equivalent of wiping the entire whiteboard clean because you're too tired to do the math. But you know, to be fair, you can kind of see why Casey Hudson and Mac Walters thought that synthesis would work as an ending. Because from a certain perspective, it's the ultimate expression of the trilogy's themes that organic and synthetic life don't have to be enemies forever. That maybe after countless cycles of war and annihilation, the only way to break the pattern is to create something entirely new. If you believe the Reapers were right about the inevitability of conflict, then synthesis feels like the only real escape. You have no more cycles, no more extermination events, just a galaxy finally freed from the mistakes of the past. It's also the ending that fulfills what Shepard has been saying over and over, that life is worth preserving, that peace is worth fighting for, even if it means risking everything. In that sense, synthesis is a very radical type of hope. It's the idea that understanding can be forced into existence, and maybe, if everyone survives long enough, it'll become genuine. It's very poetic in a way, as every living being are transformed into a shared future, whether they like it or not. And if you squint, you can sort of see it as the ultimate sacrifice. Shepard giving up not just their life, but everyone's old life to make sure nothing like the Reapers ever happens again. Of course, there's a part of me that understands that the whole idea is very tempting, because after all the loss and all the betrayals and all the moments where diplomacy fails, it feels comforting to imagine that there is a way to make the pain stop forever. That there is a solution so complete it doesn't leave room for more wars, more extinction-level threats, or more cycles of vengeance. Like, it's a very human hopefulness, and it resonates especially hard today with everything that's going on in the world. Synthesis is a future where technology doesn't divide us anymore, where nobody has to fear the machines they've created or even your fellow man, because you've all become something greater together. And in a story so obsessed with the struggle to survive, maybe it makes sense that the most optimistic ending is also the most extreme. An ending that doesn't require you to rebuild or compromise, but simply to believe that transformation, however unnatural, can solve the problems nobody else could. If nothing else, it's very consistent with Mass Effect's scale. It's an ending that refuses to be small, even if it means crossing many red lines. And I think one reason why Synthesis feels so surreal is partly because of how it was made up in the first place. Because, you know, there's this well-documented story that Casey Hudson and Mac Walters, two of the lead creatives, sat down near the end of development and basically wrote the endings themselves, working out how to wrap up a trilogy that had become bigger than anyone had expected. And now apparently, most of the writers were not even in the room, which means this massive universe-altering choice, this idea that you could rewire every life form in existence, was not the product of a big collaborative debate or a carefully balanced committee. It was a decision made by two people who tried to land the ship before it ran out of fuel. And in that context, it almost makes sense that synthesis came across the way that it does. As a solution so sweeping and absolute, it feels disconnected from the rest of the story. Like it was written in isolation, in a moment when the pressure to create something profound outweighed the need to make it feel earned. And well, as easy as it is to criticize that, there is a part of me that feels very sympathetic to this. Because you've spent years building a universe that millions of players feel personally invested in. Every decision carries weight. Every character means something to somebody. And you're the one sitting there, staring at a blank page, knowing you have to end it all in a way that feels final. Like, of course, you would be tempted to write something huge. Something that feels like it matters on a cosmic scale. Something that tries to offer closure not just to the story, but to the whole idea of conflict between synthetic and organic life. And maybe, just maybe, in that pressure cooker, synthesis felt like the only answer big enough to justify the journey, even if it meant sacrificing the nuance that made Mass Effect special in the first place. Now, you still hear people defend synthesis to this day. They'll say stuff like, my personal favorite, it's not forced assimilation if everyone benefits in the long run. Don't know about that one, champ. But here's the thing, right? Mass Effect has always been about the big picture, sure. But it was also very much about individual lives. You know, the idea that every species and every culture and every person deserved the right to choose their path, no matter how messy or imperfect that path looked. Nothing is more representative of that than Shepard's journey. Synthesis, unfortunately, just ignores that philosophy altogether. It takes away the choice to accept or reject this new reality. It imposes a vision of unity that no one gets to consent to, and pretends that just because conflict disappears, that means that everybody must be grateful. And that's why, no matter how eloquently it's framed, it just feels so hollow. Because if there's one thing the trilogy teaches us over and over, it's that progress without agency isn't progress. It's just control by another name. Now, the funny thing is, when you compare synthesis to the Control ending, the irony is even greater. Because Control is often painted as the dangerous, power-hungry option, you know, the elusive man's plan. The path where Shepard basically becomes the god emperor of the galaxy, commanding the Reapers to enforce peace. And sure, it's absolutely authoritarian. You're literally taking control of an ancient machine race and deciding how everyone else will live. But at least with Control, you know exactly what you're getting. There's no illusion that it's a natural evolution or a consensual merging.
It's pure, raw dominance.
And you know, the game doesn't pretend that it's otherwise. Synthesis, on the other hand, tries to frame itself as enlightenment, as this beautiful solution. But functionally, it's really the same idea. You remove agency from trillions of beings because you think you know what's best for them. The only real difference is that Control feels honest about its cost, while Synthesis wraps the same loss of choice in a bright green glow and calls it the final solution. Oh, and then there's Destroy, the big red button, the one that feels the most brutal on the surface. You fire the Crucible, you wipe out the Reapers, and in the process you erase all synthetic life. Geth, EDI, everything. It's messy, and it's tragic, and it's terrible, and I fucking hate it. You're forced to sacrifice allies who fought beside you, sometimes right up until the final battle. And for a lot of people, that's what makes it feel like the only ending that actually respects the stakes. Because Destroy doesn't pretend that there is a perfect answer. It doesn't dress itself up as the next step in evolution. It just gives you a choice that's honest about the cost of survival. And for all the heartbreak that comes with it, there's a sort of clarity in the end. The cycle ends because you end it completely, decisively, with no illusions about what it takes. Compared to Synthesis, Destroy almost feels humble. It acknowledges that some problems can't be solved by merging everything together, that sometimes the best you can do is break the machine and hope the galaxy finds its own way forward. Destroy is a difficult ending, but it's also the one that feels the most true to what Mass Effect was always trying to say. That you and, well, mostly everybody else in the galaxy gets to have a choice. Unless you're a robot. And you know, if you look at where the series is headed, there's a good chance Destroy is the outcome BioWare will treat as the foundation for whatever comes next. For one, it's the only ending where the Reapers are truly gone, completely defeated instead of, repurposed or integrated into society somehow. This leaves the galaxy in a state that's very messy, but very open narratively speaking, because then we have fractured alliances, broken relays, and a massive power vacuum that nobody's prepared to fill. From a storytelling perspective, it's very fertile ground. It lets the next game explore reconstruction, new conflicts, and the question of how civilizations rebuild without the shadow of the Reapers. It's also the ending with the least baggage, because if you pick Synthesis, every living thing is now also synthetic. If you pick Control, Shepard effectively becomes a godlike AI overseeing the galaxy. Both of those scenarios create so many constraints, and so many continuity headaches, that it's hard to imagine a sequel working without having to reboot the series entirely. Or, just ignore the implications, but nobody would like to see that. Destroy really is the cleanest slate. It's the one where Shepard might survive if you had enough military strength, but the galaxy is still recognizably itself. And maybe that's why, for all its brutality, Destroy feels like the most honest ending, and the most likely to shape Mass Effect's future. But hey, at the end of the day, this is all just speculation. Maybe Michael Gambel and his team has something completely different planned. Maybe the next game will pick up right where Synthesis left off, with everyone happily glowing green forever. Or maybe we'll get a fourth option that nobody ever saw coming. Maybe, just maybe, Refusal was the real ending after all. But that's just the theory, a Mass Effect theory. Thanks for watching, everyone. This has been Mr. Holten, signing off.